So imagine you're sitting down for like the most cutthroat, high-stakes game of Monopoly you can possibly picture.
No, I'm already stressed.
Right. But the board isn't sitting on some folding card table. It is literally the entire planet. And the rules are treated purely as polite suggestions for other people.
Yeah, strictly optional.
Exactly. You buy up the utilities, you buy up the transport lines, you buy the politicians, and if a sovereign government tries to stop you, you rewrite the rule book entirely.
You flip the board.
You flip the board. So today, we're doing a deep dive into the life of a man who played exactly this game. We are looking at Aristotle Onassis.
It is such a wild story.
It really is. Like, you might know him as the billionaire who married Jackie Kennedy, but our mission today, based on our biographical sources, is to explore how a completely penniless refugee went on to become this global shipping titan. A guy who fought sovereign nations, amassed a massive empire, and just totally blurred the line between genius entrepreneur and modern-day pirate.
You know, the pirate comparison is probably the most accurate lens you can use to look at his entire life.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because to understand Onassis, you have to realize that he operated on a fundamentally different moral and legal axis than, the rest of the business world. But the thing is, he wasn't born a pirate.
Right.
He was made into one by just a staggering level of trauma. I mean, to understand the sheer velocity of his ambition later in life, you really have to start with how he lost absolutely everything.
Yeah, I want to dig into that origin story right away because it completely recontextualizes his ruthlessness. So Onassis was born in 1906 in the Ottoman Empire, in this major port city called Smyrna, which is modern-day Izmir in Turkey.
Right.
And his early life wasn't a struggle at all. Like, his family was actually incredibly wealthy. His father was this highly successful shipping entrepreneur. Aristotle went to the best schools, and our sources note that by the time he was just 16 years old, he already spoke Greek, Turkish, Spanish, and English.
Yeah, he was brilliant. I mean, he was being primed to inherit a very comfortable, highly privileged life within this deeply established social order.
Right, he was set.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that established order literally burned to the ground.
Literally.
Following World War I, there was this massive geopolitical conflict in the region, culminating in the Greco-Turkish War. And in 1922, Smyrna was captured, and what followed was the Great Fire of Smyrna. It was just a catastrophic, world-altering event for the people living there.
The accounts of that fire are horrifying. I mean, the Onassis family didn't just lose their properties and their massive fortune. Aristotle lost several family members who were actually burned to death while seeking shelter in a church.
It's just unimaginable.
It is. His father was thrown into a prison camp, all their businesses were seized, and Aristotle had to flee to Greece as a refugee, living in a literal outdoor camp. And you have to wonder, like, how does a teenager even begin to process that level of sudden, violent devastation?
Well, by learning a very dark, very permanent lesson about how the world actually works.
Yeah.
That level of trauma at such a formative age, it's basically the crucible of his entire personality.
Yeah.
He witnessed firsthand that wealth, social status, political stability, it's all just an illusion.
It can all vanish.
Violently taken away in a single night.
Yeah.
So when you internalize that lesson at 16, it breeds this relentless, almost desperate kind of ambition. I mean, the laws and rules of society entirely failed to protect his family.
So why follow them?
Exactly. From his perspective, why should he ever feel bound by those rules? They're useless.
That shifts the perspective entirely. Like, it turns the traditional, startup bootstrap story into something much more survivalist. Because in 1923, he decides to leave Europe and heads to Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Yeah, across the world.
Yeah, and he arrives with a Nansen passport and just $250 to his name. But a Nansen passport isn't a normal travel document, is it?
Not at all. It was this invention of the League of Nations, specifically for the massive waves of refugees after World War I. It was essentially a certificate of statelessness. Yeah, it allows you to cross a border, but it guarantees absolutely zero protection from any government. You have no home country to call on if you get into trouble. You are entirely, completely on your own.
So he lands in Argentina, totally stateless. He gets a job working the night shift as a telephone operator, and he literally eavesdrops on business calls to learn about commerce.
Which is brilliant, honestly.
It's so smart. And then he starts an import-export business dealing in English-Turkish tobacco.
Yeah, and Argentina in the 1920s was basically the perfect blank slate for someone in his position. It was a booming, resource-rich economy that was an ocean away from the geopolitical powder keg of Europe.
Right, completely removed.
He could establish himself there without the rigid class barriers of the old world holding him back.
Yeah.
So by 1929, he actually gains Argentine citizenship, which finally gives him a legal foothold and this dual identity that he would strategically exploit for decades. And that's where he establishes his first shipping trading company, Aristotle Onassis.
Okay, but there's a shocking detail from the sources regarding how he actually funded that early empire.
Oh, yeah. The Maria Callas story.
Yes. He reportedly confessed to the opera singer Maria Callas later in his life that his first real fortune in Buenos Aires didn't come from importing tobacco. He claimed he formed a shipping company that was specifically used to traffic heroin.
Yeah, it's a staggering claim to make about your own origins. And while historians rely on biographical accounts for that specific confession, it aligns perfectly with the core philosophy he developed in Argentina.
Oh, so?
Well, to Onassis, commodities are just commodities. If there is demand, you supply it. The actual legality of the cargo was always secondary to the profitability of moving it from point A to point B.
Right, it's just boxes on a ship.
Exactly.
Which perfectly explains how he took that initial wealth and multiplied it by literally rewriting the rules of the ocean. I mean, he didn't just build a shipping fleet, he built a shadow empire on the waves.
He really did.
We are talking about a fleet of over 70 massive vessels, mostly oil tankers and freighters, operating under a system that he essentially helped pioneer.
You're referring to flags of convenience.
Yes, exactly.
This is a crucial mechanism to understand if you want to know how global shipping actually works, even today. Because, if you register your oil tanker in the United States or the United Kingdom, you are legally bound by their strict labor laws.
Which means money.
Lots of money.
Yeah.
You have to pay high union wages, you have to provide pensions, and you have to maintain rigorous safety standards with regular government inspections. All of that cuts deeply into your profit margins.
And Onassis looks at the ocean and realizes it's largely unpoliced.
Precisely. He realizes that you can basically commodify national sovereignty.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, like you take a ship owned by a Greek man operating out of a corporate office in New York, but you just bolt a piece of metal to the back of the ship that says Monrovia, Liberia, or Panama.
Right.
And suddenly, U.S. labor laws don't apply. Minimum wage doesn't apply. Those strict safety inspections just vanish because Liberia doesn't have the naval infrastructure to inspect ships halfway across the globe.
See, I have to push back on the way this gets framed in business history sometimes because he is often celebrated as this, clever tycoon who just found a brilliant tax loophole.
Yeah, the romanticized billionaire.
Exactly. But looking at the reality of his operations in the sources, he sounds less like a hero of capitalism and more like a reckless villain. I mean, he was sacrificing basic human safety just to secure his bottom line.
Oh, absolutely. That is the dark reality of the flags of convenience model. When you remove regulation, you remove safety nets. Do you have a specific example in mind from the sources?
I do, actually, because the 1970 SS Aero disaster perfectly captures how terrifying this practice is. So it was a Liberian-registered tanker owned by Onassis that spilled a massive amount of oil into Chedabucto Bay in Nova Scotia.
It's an absolute ecological nightmare.
Total nightmare. And when the Commission of Inquiry investigated how it happened, they didn't find a freak storm or a random accident. They found a ship that was practically falling apart.
Yeah, the findings of that inquiry were completely damning. I mean, the radar on the ship was totally broken.
Just dead.
Completely dead. The echo sounder, which tells you how deep the water is, hadn't worked for 2 months.
2 months.
The gyro compass was permanently off by 3 degrees. And honestly, the human element was even worse. The third officer who was on watch during the disaster had literally no navigational license. Almost nobody on the ship had proper navigational skills.
Okay, but how does a global shipping titan get away with operating a multi-million-dollar oil tanker with a broken compass and an unlicensed crew?
Because to Onassis, these events weren't accidents. They were just statistical probabilities.
Wow.
Fines, massive oil spills, even the total loss of a ship. These were just factored in as the cost of doing business. When massive oil companies like Mobil and Texaco needed to move millions of barrels of oil quickly, Onassis could vastly underbid all of his competitors because his operating expenses were virtually non-existent.
Right, because he's not paying for radar repairs.
Exactly. He didn't fix the radar because it was literally cheaper to let the ship occasionally crash. International laws weren't laws to him. They were just a pricing structure.
It's just a line item on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
You see that exact same disregard for international law with his whaling expeditions in the 1950s. Between 1950 and 1956, he sends his factory ship, the Olympic Challenger, off the west coast of South America.
Oh, this story's wild.
It is. And at the time, there are strict international agreements on whaling quotas on the size of the whales, the number you can catch, and the specific seasons you are allowed to hunt.
And Onassis' approach was basically to treat the ocean like an all-you-can-eat buffet with no cashier.
Literally.
The testimonials from the sailors on his factory ship are incredibly grim. They engaged in industrial-scale poaching. They reported slaughtering absolutely everything they found in the water, entirely ignoring the quotas.
Baby whales. Everything.
Everything. There are accounts of pieces of fresh meat from over 100 whales scattered on the deck, and only one of those whales was considered an adult. He was systematically wiping out entire generations of marine life.
It gets so out of hand that the government of Peru realizes diplomacy isn't going to work. So they actually send their navy to intercept his fleet.
A naval interception over whales.
Yes. The Peruvian Air Force drops bombs that explode right near his factory ship. It is a literal military engagement. Peru captures most of his whaling vessels, but Onassis doesn't go to international court. He just turns around, sells the entire whaling operation to a Japanese company for $8.5 million, and casually walks away.
He treated a military attack by a sovereign nation as a minor transactional hazard. I mean, it's unbelievable. But, operating above the law on the high seas is one thing. Where this story takes a truly wild turn is when the ocean becomes too small for his ambition.
Oh, right.
And he starts attempting to dominate sovereign governments on land.
That transition from the sea to the land is fascinating because in 1953, he sets his sights on the Principality of Monaco. He doesn't just want to buy a villa there. He effectively wants to buy the entire country.
As one does.
Right. And he uses this labyrinth of front companies in Panama to secretly start buying up shares of an entity called SBM. So what exactly was SBM, and why did it give him the keys to the country?
So SBM stands for Société de Bain de Mer. And it wasn't just like a local business. It was the economic engine of Monaco.
Okay.
The company owned the Monte Carlo Casino, the Yacht Club, the Hotel de Paris, and they owned roughly a third of the physical acreage of the Principality. So by secretly acquiring a controlling stake in SBM through his shell companies, Onassis effectively bought control over Monaco's entire economy.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around a private citizen secretly buying a third of a European country.
It's basically a supervillain plot.
It really is. And at first, Monaco's ruler, Prince Rainier III, welcomes the capital because the country is struggling financially, but very quickly they realize they are trapped in a bitter feud over the very soul of the country.
Yeah. They had entirely incompatible visions. Onassis viewed Monaco as his own private, ultra-exclusive playground. He wanted to keep it restricted to only the highest echelon of the global elite.
Right, keep the masses out.
Exactly. But Prince Rainier realized that the modern world was changing. For Monaco to survive and thrive economically, it needed mass tourism. He wanted to build large tourist hotels.
Which makes sense.
But Onassis flatly refused to allow SBM to invest in those hotels, unless he was given a strict guarantee that no one else would ever be allowed to build competing businesses. He wanted a total monopoly.
But the prince actually figures out a way to beat him at his own game, which I love. Prince Rainier uses the one thing Onassis doesn't have: absolute state power. How exactly did Rainier force him out?
He basically changed the rules of the board. Prince Rainier passed legislation creating 600,000 brand new shares of SBM out of thin air and dictated that those shares would be permanently held by the government of Monaco.
So he just diluted Onassis' ownership overnight.
Instantly. By flooding the market with state-owned shares, Onassis' ownership stake shrank from over 50% down to under a third. He lost his controlling interest in a single legislative stroke.
That is brilliant.
Onassis actually tried to sue the government in the Supreme Court of Monaco, but you can't really sue a sovereign monarch in his own court and win.
No, the house always wins.
Exactly.
Mm.
Onassis lost, sold his remaining shares, and famously left Monaco stating, quote, "We were gypped."
It is incredible to see him finally hit a wall. But while he was fighting over casinos in Monaco, he was simultaneously playing an infinitely more dangerous game in the Middle East.
Oh, the Saudi deal.
Yes. In the 1950s, he tried to secure a global monopoly on transporting all the oil out of Saudi Arabia. But the American company Aramco, the Arabian-American oil company, already had that monopoly tightly locked down. Surely the American oil cartel wasn't just going to let him walk in and take their crown jewel, right?
Absolutely not. The United States government saw Onassis' Saudi deal not just as a corporate dispute, but as a severe threat to American national security and the entire post-war petroleum order.
Yeah.
I mean, if one rogue billionaire controlled the transit of Middle Eastern oil, he could hold the global economy hostage. So the U.S. mobilized the full weight of its intelligence and justice systems to crush him.
And they don't hold back. The FBI opens this massive fraud investigation into his shipping practices. They charge him with violating U.S. shipping laws, and he eventually has to plead guilty and pay a $7 million fine, which is a massive public humiliation. But the covert response, that is something straight out of a spy novel.
The covert operations are where you see just how terrified the establishment was of his power. Historical accounts detail a deep state operation involving Robert Maheu, a former FBI agent who was working for then Vice President Richard Nixon.
Okay.
Maheu was explicitly tasked with sabotaging Onassis' Saudi oil deal by any means necessary.
And the instructions he received are terrifying. Vice President Nixon reportedly whispered to Maheu that if it turns out they have to, quote, kill the bastard, don't do it on American soil.
I mean, just pause and think about that trajectory. It highlights the absolute zenith of his disruptive power. Aristotle Onassis, a boy who fled the fires of Smyrna as a penniless, stateless refugee, had grown so powerful and so threatening to the global economic order that the Vice President of the United States was allegedly authorizing his assassination.
It is staggering.
It really is.
But despite having billions of dollars, fleets of ships, and the ability to survive the wrath of the U.S. intelligence apparatus, there was one thing Onassis deeply craved that his money alone couldn't secure.
Yeah, respect.
Exactly. He wanted absolute cultural legitimacy. He didn't want to just be a feared pirate anymore. He wanted to be respected as royalty.
That is the crucial psychological pivot of his later decades. He recognized that a reputation as a ruthless, law-breaking tycoon is ultimately a liability when you are trying to build a lasting family dynasty.
Right.
To secure a legacy that would survive him, he needed to transition from an underworld figure to a respected global statesman. And he pursued that legitimacy through two highly calculated avenues: prestigious national investments and highly strategic romances.
On the business side, he decides to basically become a national symbol. In 1957, he founds Olympic Airways by taking over the Greek national airline. He poured his own wealth into it to create an aura of supreme luxury, like he was buying gold-plated utensils for the first-class cabins.
Naturally.
And his arrogance was on full display. When the International Olympic Committee told him he couldn't use the 5 Olympic rings for his logo due to copyright laws, what did he do? He just added a 6th ring to the logo and kept flying.
Because the rules applied to everyone else, never to him.
Never.
He was basically buying national pride. He even launched Project Omega in the late 1960s, which was this massive $400 million industrial investment in Greece, where he worked directly with the Greek military junta. He was essentially trying to make himself the indispensable economic savior of his homeland.
But if you look at his romantic life, it is just as calculated as his business deals. His marriages function exactly like corporate mergers. They are rigidly negotiated, entirely strategic, and purely focused on acquiring the ultimate status symbols.
The merger analogy is incredibly accurate. If you look at his first marriage in 1946, he married Athena Lavanos. Now, he was 40 years old, and she was just 17. But more importantly, she was the daughter of Stavros Lavanos, the undisputed patriarch of traditional Greek shipping.
So he isn't just marrying a young woman, he is executing a hostile takeover of high society.
Exactly. The old money Greek traditionalists despised Onassis. They viewed him as unrefined, a dangerous gangster who didn't belong in their elite circles.
Right.
By marrying the daughter of their patriarch, Onassis forced the old guard to let him into the club. He basically acquired their social standing by force of contract.
But the culture clash ruins the merger. He is constantly unfaithful. She eventually catches him cheating with her own friend in their chateau, and they divorce. And in the ultimate billionaire plot twist, she later marries his arch business rival, Stavros Niarchos.
You can't write this stuff.
No. But Onassis just moves on to acquire a more famous asset. He begins a very public, long-standing affair with Maria Callas, who was arguably the most famous opera singer in the world at the time.
He was merging ultimate financial wealth with ultimate artistic prestige. He famously remarked that they were the most famous Greeks alive. But you're right, even the pinnacle of artistic prestige wasn't enough to satisfy his craving for legitimacy.
It never is.
Because in 1968, he pulls off the most audacious merger of his entire life.
He marries Jacqueline Kennedy, the widow of JFK.
I'm old.
He marries her on his private Greek island, Scorpios. If you are trying to buy cultural status in the 20th century, there is no bigger acquisition than marrying American royalty. But the mechanics of how that marriage came together, it just strips away any illusion of conventional romance.
It was negotiated with the clinical precision of a corporate buyout.
The prenup is fascinating. It was heavily negotiated by Ted Kennedy, Jackie's brother-in-law. Because Jackie would lose her financial access to the Kennedy Trust by remarrying, Onassis agreed to pay her $3 million upfront, plus $1 million for each of her two children just to secure the marriage.
He was literally compensating her for the depreciation of her previous assets.
That is exactly what it was.
He acquired the ultimate icon of global legitimacy, and she acquired an impenetrable fortress of wealth and physical security away from the American spotlight. From a penniless refugee in Argentina to the husband of the former First Lady of the United States, he had conquered every corner of the global board.
But we have to look at how this story actually ends. Because despite acquiring every conceivable asset on the planet, his final years are defined by profound tragedy. The entire purpose of building this empire was to pass it down to his family dynasty, specifically to his son Alexander.
And in 1973, that future was just erased. Alexander died in a plane crash at the age of 24. And for Onassis, this wasn't just the devastating emotional loss of a child. It was the total collapse of the architecture he had spent 50 years building. The empire suddenly had no heir. The biographical accounts indicate that the grief fundamentally broke his spirit and his health.
It's a rapid decline. Just 2 years later, in 1975, Onassis died in France at the age of 69. He had undergone gallbladder surgery and developed pneumonia, but what really destroyed him was myasthenia gravis. Can you explain how that disease actually affects the body?
It is an autoimmune disorder where the communication between your nerves and your muscles essentially breaks down. Your muscles stop receiving the signals to contract.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it leads to severe, debilitating muscle weakness. So the man who spent his entire life asserting absolute rigid control over governments, oceans, and global markets slowly lost the ability to even control his own eyelids or his own breathing. In the end, his own body betrayed the empire.
And the empire itself was carved up. The majority of his estate, about 45%, went to establish a charitable public benefit foundation in memory of his son. The rest went to his daughter, Christina. And Jackie Kennedy negotiated a final settlement of tens of millions of dollars to sever her ties to the estate.
His wealth was dispersed, and his unyielding grip on the world finally relaxed.
There is one final, incredibly bizarre detail from the sources that really puts his legacy into perspective. You know his private Boeing 727?
The Flying Palace?
Yeah, a flying palace that he used to cross the globe, the exact same plane that transported his remains back to Greece. Decades later, an American electrical engineer bought that exact plane from a salvage yard for $100,000, dragged it into the deep woods of Hillsboro, Oregon, and turned it into a house.
It is a remarkably striking image. I mean, the ultimate symbol of mobility for the world's most feared tycoon, completely stripped of its power, just propped up on pillars in the quiet Oregon woods.
When you look at the entirety of this story, the monopoly board he built across the globe, Onassis spent his whole life bypassing international laws, fleeing burning cities, battling the FBI, and buying prestige. He acquired everything the world had to offer, yet the one thing that truly mattered to him, his family dynasty, couldn't be protected by all those billions. It leaves you wondering, at what point does the relentless pursuit of an empire end up costing you the very life you were trying to build?